Hey folks, and hope everyone's doing good. Thank you for watching and welcome to my channel. And subscribe if you haven't. Give it a thumbs up if you like the video. Let me know any thoughts, comments, questions, experiences, ideas, anything. I love it. And thank you for watching. So I've got a really cool video again about aliens and UFOs. So it is basically, there's a retired U.S. Colonel Carl Nell, and he spoke at the SALT conference, which is an annual, maybe even twice a year, I don't know, but they do it every year. It goes on Wall Street, and it brings together all these entrepreneurs and investors, celebrities, business-minded folks, people who are tied into finance ministers from various countries. So it's a lot of high-level or top-level people in the fields of business, technology, and investing in money. So, and if you're wondering why he spoke at this conference, it does tie in directly to that, because there are some real major implications to all of these things as far as not only what we know, but what we haven't been told, and the information that's being released as far as what exactly is going on in outer space and with all these UFOs, and is there alien life? Well, this guy, he adds to a list of many, and he even mentions these people. There was a Canadian, was he a former prime minister or president? However they do that up there. He's fairly old. I think he's still alive, though. But he, along with the recently retired Israeli, one of the generals there, who was also part of their Space Force command, both these guys admitted to aliens being real. And he even put in his book, the Israeli guy, that Donald Trump knew about it, but he was told very seriously not to tell anybody, because he was like, well, I'm going to tell everybody. And they're like, well, no. It just sounds true, doesn't it? So, but they're like, no, absolutely not. And there's a lot of good reasons behind why this information is being carefully disclosed little by little, which we'll get into more. I think it's fascinating. But plus, there's Dr. Stephen Greer, there's Luis Elizondo, and David Grush. I think it's David, the guy who recently, these whistleblowers who have come forth and say, we've been part of these programs for a long time. And now you have Colonel Carl Nell at the SALT conference as well, just coming out and sharing this information. He even talks about disclosure and the implications of it. And that's what I found most interesting, because here's this government official coming out. All these guys I listed have talked about aliens being real, and there's a lot of them, and we've been in contact with them. He just comes out bluntly and says it. And we'll get to the video in a second. And it's pretty long, but I kind of want to watch it with you guys and talk through it, because I was really trying to listen and watch it over and over and just analyze exactly what he's saying. And when you kind of put together the big picture, it's pretty amazing. And it kind of corroborates some of the things I've been researching and channeling information about as well, and makes sense. It just made like the bigger picture a little bit more clear for me, and I kind of want to walk through that. I think it's pretty cool stuff. But here we have this retired colonel who's part of this disclosure process even, and he comes out, and there said, is there intelligent non-human life? And he said yes, just like, plain and simple. And he said intelligent non-human beings are absolutely real, and we've been communicating with them for quite a while. And there's a lot of people, unelected people in the government, who know these sorts of things, and some that are elected, but it's kept very, very restricted. So there's a lot of folks in the United States government and other world governments that's very aware of these sorts of things, but a large majority is not. So, and then the host also asked him, well, how sure of this are you? And he said, zero doubt. He said zero. They're real, and we've been talking with them a long time. So this sort of confirmation is just really, really amazing. So, and a lot of President Nixon was reported to have, shown some alien bodies that we recovered, like David Grush confirmed that we've recovered bodies to some of his friends, like, hey, look what we have. So these stories and speculation go back, and eventually it's going to be common knowledge, what we all kind of assumed. But for people like me, I think it's exciting. I'm pretty excited about it anyways, because one day, our great 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 grandkids are just going to be born, and aliens will be a part of their life in UFOs, right? So, life on other planets. But for us, it's like this massive evolution of our ideologies and our paradigm as human beings. Like, is there a life out there? And our government's told us for decades now, we don't know. UFOs, those aren't UFOs, it's a weather balloon, it's an airplane, and aliens aren't real. And now they're like, okay, yeah, those are UFOs, yeah, those are aliens, they're real, and we've known this a long, long time. And there's reasons about, economic stability and geopolitical reasons and staying ahead of our enemies, but also internal turmoil and the kind of chaos that this sort of information could cause if not released carefully. And I think the end result, and the Colonel talks about this, there's a stable model of post-full disclosure, but there's also a somewhat stable model that we have now on Earth as far as, resources and scarcity, but also but like religious and belief systems and what we believe, for example. These things are big deals, for example. And right now the model is much turmoil as we have across planet Earth as it is. The world is fairly stable, arguably so, of course, but overall, it's not like pure chaos in World War III right now. So, like he said, there's a pre-disclosure model and a post-disclosure model, and they're both fairly stable, but the model that connects them, the transition, can prove to be very chaotic, and it needs to be controlled and done very gradually, or it can be very catastrophic. And they're in the processes of doing this now. So over the next 10 years, 5 or 10 years or so, I think it's going to get very interesting. So let's watch the video and walk through it. And I'll pause from time to time and just kind of try to analyze exactly what he's telling us and then kind of try to wrap it all up in the end. So
all right, so here is the video. I skipped the first couple parts. It's just an intro. He goes on for like a minute and a half about all his credentials and also what he's worked in, the Army, the different places, and most recently was his last assignment. He's retired now from the Army, but was the UAP task force. So UAP is just the new word for UFO. Just means unidentified aerial phenomenon. So, and here's where the conversation picks up here, or begins rather.
And so, Carl, here's the $1 million question. Do you believe that a higher form of non-human intelligence has visited this planet?
Right. So non-human intelligence exists. Non-human intelligence has been interacting with humanity. This interaction is not new, and it's been ongoing. And there are unelected people in the government that are aware of that.
And so, Carl, that is quite a bold statement. I'm wondering, and I'm curious, how confident are you that that is true?
There's zero doubt.
And Carl, what evidence have you seen? What was the moment where you developed?
So it's interesting. He just comes right out and says it. Now, some of the other folks that have talked about this, either retired individuals or people that are whistleblowers, I don't know. Usually whistleblowers do things against the established rule set, meaning they are trying to call something out that they shouldn't be calling out to one degree or another. Now, this guy, though, it's a little bit different. So it's not like he's doing anything, he's coming out and trying to blow the lid open on anything. He's actually part of a non-disclosure project to gradually release this information to society, America, and the world as well. So I think this is part of the plan. Just like they've been gradually admitting to us the reality of UFOs, aliens, other folks who come forth and said there's aliens, government officials, retired leaders at the highest levels of different world governments. So there's a lot of folks who are aware of this. There's a vast majority of government level officials who are not aware of this. But many people, like especially the leaders, like Donald Trump knew and Queen Elizabeth knew. I actually talked to her about that a little bit. So I had some conversations about that kind of thing. And so this information, though, is no longer being kept secret. And he talks about like the reasons why, which is interesting. But here's the next part.
Develop this level of conviction, because what you're saying is extremely consequential and very important. And I know that a lot of people here, even perhaps, may not believe that statement.
Right. Well, probably a better way to ask that is, how can the folks in the audience come to the, a common understanding of what this phenomenon is? And so there's sort of two tracks here. One is from first principles, and another is actually from the data. So let's take a look at the data. So we can look at some folks that have very high level access to information, like Paul Hellyer, who is the defense chief for Canada, has come out and said the same thing. We can look at Ham Eshed, the head of Israel's, or former head of Israel's Space Force, has said the same thing. Chris Mellon, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Intel, SAPCO, has essentially said the same thing. Lou Elizondo has said the same thing. David Grush has said the same thing. David Grush cleared for presidentially level material. So you're looking at people that are in a position to know this, and they're telling you the same thing. You could take a look at the Gang of Eight in the Senate and in Congress. So there's two members of the Gang of Eight, Marco Rubio and Senator Chuck Schumer, that signed up to the UAP disclosure amendment last year that basically said they're not being told the truth, and we need to push forward on that.
So I thought this is really interesting back and forth. The interviewer does a pretty good job, but this guy does an interesting job, really good job too, of answering the questions. Not completely. There's always going to be some level of non-disclosure when it comes to national security, I think. However, and to maintain a certain level of stability and minimize or mitigate any chaos or major shifts in the way that our economies or our minds work about belief systems and that kind of thing. But so the interviewer asked him, well, what was it that made you, decide that this was true? And he said, well, not me. Like, the better question is basically, because he's part of this. He said, let's look at the data. There's a couple ways to look at this from a series of principles, which he goes into later, ideas and ways to manage this kind of information, or the possibility of these things becoming reality, which they are, and he kind of explains what those principles are. But anyways, or the actual data itself. So he said, what's a good way for, like, for example, you guys in the room to come to an understanding? Well, because there's a lot of people that have come forward recently that are in the position to know, and they've been saying exactly what I just told you. Aliens are real, and we've been dealing with them for a long time. So that's how he answered the question. The guy's like, how do you know? What made you decide? He's like, well, come on, man. I've seen the proof. So here's a good way to explain it to you guys. For example, how do we get that understanding to you as far as, whether this is believable to the audience or whoever's watching?
So that's sort of an overview of some of the data. From a first principles standpoint, what's so unusual about this realization? There's billions of stars in the galaxy. Life here evolved in 500 million years, which is basically a blink of an eye. We've found planets around every star that we've looked at. It's likely that the universe is full of life. If you look at the SETI program in particular, the SETI program has all the same assumptions that you would accept and probably make with respect to this topic, except that they believe that non-human intelligence is transmitting signals here. But at the same time, like, we're not transmitting signals. SETI doesn't transmit signals, and the only signals that are actually broadcast of high enough power into space for somebody to pick up come from broadcast television and ballistic.
So what SETI is that he's talking about, SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. It was a program that was put together and launched, I think, back in 1984, so 40 years ago, quite some time, to find the best frequencies for contact and to, he said, we're not sending signals, we're sending signals. So it was to listen for incoming signals, for example, and also send out messages to see who's out there. Now, these beings are so advanced, there was an immediate response. And remember, this face-to-face contact with aliens has actually been going on for several decades, longer than 40 years, like 80 or more years, actually. 80 to 100 years. And they've been visiting here. They're actually here on Earth, underground, underwater. They have bases in mountains. They're interdimensional. They have cloaking devices as well. So they're well hidden. And a lot of this, them being made visible more recently, is partly on purpose, actually. So as to, be a gentle introduction as to their reality. They've been here as long as we have, believe it or not, observing. Think of it like us with any species of humans that's out there that's still living in a very tribal, like out in the middle of the jungle. We're around and we know they're there, but we're just kind of letting them do their own thing until they begin to reach a certain level of communication and willingness and wantingness to elevate their knowledge and technology in order to interact with higher level beings, in other words, to one degree or another. It's a pretty rough analogy, but I think it makes sense anyways. So, and he was talking about the principles, for example. He said, well, here's some good ways to believe what I'm saying. Of course, we need the proof. I mean, the ultimate proof is going to be when they show up and start talking to us, and they're on CNN and they're on Fox, and we start doing interviews with them, and for example, and that's going to happen eventually. But what he's saying is, just think about the statistical possibility, all these scientific principles and ideas. Statistically speaking, and we found other planets, and of course they hide a lot of knowledge from us about what they find. They've found a ton of planets with life on them. NASA has video or pictures of structures on Mars. The government knows this information, and they've gotten this from some of our own exploration, but we really don't know too much. But the aliens have actually explained this. They know the entire history of Earth and what came before us and the massive history of the universe, and we're just waiting to learn it. There are pyramids on Mars. There's like Egyptian-style statues and structures and faces on Mars, and you can see these pictures on NASA. The CIA has declassified documents about astral projection and remote viewing and their experiments with that. So this knowledge is out there hiding in plain sight, and they're releasing it little by little over the past 10 to 20 years. Now, he's just trying to explain to us, again, not to circle back, but the guy was like, what made you believe it? And he's like, well, I'm here to convince you. So look at the data and the principles and possibility, and just know that what I'm saying and others are saying is true. But again, ultimately, we see the UFOs, and there's some videos. There's a Fox video. I did a video on it actually about the spaceship crashing in the family's backyard, and they had it. It was officially analyzed by forensics analysts, and they said it was real. And you could see aliens kind of cloaked walking around in the backyard. It's crazy. So, anyways, he's making these big statements, and of course, one may think, as I was too, like, well, why aren't these announcements all over the news everywhere? Well, again, controlled release. These aren't all over the media. They allow what is to be released gradually in order to control this information being released to the public. So as massive as these announcements are, they're out there, like in videos like this, but it's not being, they're not making this a world topic, even though all the world leaders know this.
Ballistic missile early warning systems, which you could argue our technology is moving away from. We're going to satellite, we're going to fiber. Broadcast TV is a thing of the past. And if you get to some state where society is stable, maybe we don't need ballistic missile early warning systems. So the other guy is probably not going to transmit. But what the other guy may do is come here if that's possible to do. And there's physics models that suggest that may be possible.
And Carl, what you're saying is extremely consequential, and you've referenced other people that have said the same thing.
So he was just saying, like, as far as the distance from solar systems and these life space, other areas where they found life, and again, they just don't tell us where and what they found. But there's bases on the moon. There's alien bases on the moon, and again, spaceships, and people have phones nowadays, and it's crazy. So we're becoming more and more aware of this with more proof. But he said, because like right now, for example, the distance to some of these stars is so great. Our current understanding of like travel and speed would take us like thousands or hundreds of years, for example, just to travel to one of these places. Well, what he's saying is there's physics models that exist that that say they can travel these incredibly, seemingly impossible distances in the blink of an eye, basically. And Dr. Stephen Greer, another guy who's big in this UAP community and secret government organizations, who's releasing this information too, talks about this. They have an advanced level of science far beyond ours, and they have the ability, what would take our current level of not only ability, but simply knowledge. We don't even understand quite yet, but we do have the physics models now to theorize how the hell, what does a UFO get from here, point A to point B, from here to the moon, or from their star system to Earth in like just a matter of minutes or hours or almost instantaneously, when it supposedly, theoretically, should take hundreds or thousands of years. That's because they're well beyond our ability to not just create, but even theorize these sorts of things or test them or put them into practice. But the government they have all sorts of high levels of knowledge, of course, that they haven't told us about. But for good reason, though, actually. I used to disagree with that, but I agree with it, that sort of controlled release now more and more. But anyways.
That also have similar credibility. There's similar reasons for why we should believe many of these folks, yet the government itself has not formally disclosed. They've been very reluctant to do that. Why? Why do you think that is?
So there's 6 basic reasons, and this, again, you could draw this out from first principles. There's a national security reason. There's the lack of a plan. There's the potential for societal disruption. There's the possibility that there's some non-public agreement. There's the potential for misdeeds and the desire to cover up misdeeds. And there's just the basic organizational intransigence and lack of priority that might be associated with the topic.
That was a whole lot to unpack there. So I actually watched that a bunch of times just to help streamline that. So I had to look up intransigence too. But what that is it is the lack of ability to shift from one system to another, or like change, in other words, your current model to the next. And he said just the lack of resources or interest in this kind of thing, at least for the time being. So that's what intransigence means. But also national security, and we don't have a plan. That was interesting. We don't have a plan. And of course, the potential for disruption, like chaos, if you think about it. Because really, I used to think like, well, just tell us what's the big deal. It's very, very nuanced. Right, so he even says everything is subsumed under national security. We still have enemies here on Earth that we have to deal with. Now we have these unknown civilizations out there who appear friendly. They've been here forever. Their bases have been here forever. They're not attacking us. They're not doing anything. Kind of like the analogy I used earlier. They're just kind of here observing without interfering to one degree or another. And but are here waiting for us to reach that next level, which we're getting to. So. And as our technology grew and we began to not only capture spacecraft, but like down to alien pilots and reverse engineer these things, the ability to harness this technology is critical to stay on top of world economics and military power, like with America and all their allies across the globe. Because if you think about it, if all the money and military power and technological knowledge was controlled by, like, say, Russia or North Korea or China or Syria, their allies. I mean, could you imagine, would you want China and North Korea and Russia, being the largest economy and largest military, and them basically taking over the planet or most of the planet and having control and telling people what to do? And it's the whole good versus bad, or freedom versus, oppression or control, jailing, extrajudicial punishment, that sort of thing. Dictatorships, monarchies, things that control versus allow for freedom. It's a very nuanced argument there too that I don't want to get into, of course, but at a very high level, that's what it comes down to. So
all these things are factors. The issue is that really the national security issue subsumes all the others. And so there's an opportunity maybe to contract the national security issue, similarly to what was done with nuclear weapons and nuclear energy, such that nuclear energy is not necessarily classified and is available to the public. But lack of a plan and the potential for societal disruption are key ingredients that would prevent any responsible leader from coming forward with information that they don't have the means to address in a responsible way. It would be irresponsible to do that.
Yeah, that makes so much sense now too. It's like, because we're still, all of our problems on Earth really come down to resource scarcity and the ability to control that, power basically, and to protect one's own people, but yet, allow your people to thrive while protecting yourself from outside threats, for example. But energy and resources and money and housing and education and medicine, like these sorts of things we've made strides globally with these kind of things, but really scarcity of resources and money and economics and military, that's what drives our the world economy geopolitically, basically, and ideological differences, which is the other half of that. So resources and then ideology. A lot of the conflicts just come from division amongst ourselves as people. Like there's no human unity, in other words, because the big question of where do we come from and where do we go when we die, still speculation, and resource scarcity as well. These two main categories, there's probably some more, but those are two big ones there that just create all the differences and divisions that we have. If you imagine if no one, like the whole planet, how things would change if we had gotten to a state of post-scarcity, and food and medicine and housing and renewable energy, like infinite 0 point renewable energy, which is real and a very real possibility. Nikola Tesla was one of the original people, I think, experimenting with this kind of thing. But if you can imagine if these things were known and the knowledge of our entire human history, what's our connection to Mars, and why do we have deactivated DNA that theoretically, according to some, which there's some truth in, was it genetically manipulated by others? Where do we come from? For example, we have elements of Homo sapien physiology in us, but they're so remarkably different than us as we know humans today. Are we evolved Homo sapiens that turned into what we know as humans? Or did they die off, which they have actually? They're not actually around, just remnants of trace elements of them in our physiology. Or was their physiology combined with ours and tinkered with to make us better humans, or that sort of thing? So, and why is there human civilization evidence on Mars that looks like Egypt? And these sorts of things, AI, I've done videos on this, the ability to understand death and study and see where the soul goes after we die. We can create AI and supercomputers to not only observe and capture these sorts of things, but, to measure things on a non-physical level. But that would allow us to communicate and study, of course, with beings that exist in the non-physical, half of the duality spectrum. In other words, the afterlife. So technology to bridge these realms is possible, and there are aliens conceptually, and alien species out there have reached certain levels of non-scarcity. Theoretically, it's possible, and if you can imagine, it would change everything if we understood, wait, humans have a history on other planets, and there's alien bases on the moon, and like we have possible off-world origins. We didn't fully evolve here, and we can communicate with the afterlife and understand where our souls go once we die, and communicate with them once our technology reaches that level. Like, these things are possible. Can you imagine? It would just upend religion. We have enough problems on this planet due to religious differences and resource scarcity as it is. So this is major information. It's not small stuff, and the world governments, again, I can't say this enough, not only do they know about UFOs and aliens, but having been in contact with these beings, not just with us, they've been here all along again. So there have been past ancient civilizations that have talked with them directly as well. But they have this knowledge of hidden human history and where do we come from and the potential of technology and where it can go. They know it all. And it's just so amazing if you think about it, especially, and this is kind of the big picture of our ultimate potential as humans. And I hope we don't screw it up, and hopefully we will get to that point. But all this just coming together with proof and gradual admission by world governments about these beings being real, and these theories being proven true, what we once thought was impossible, is becoming, it paints a very magnificent picture, in my opinion.
Okay, so what you're saying is that you have absolute conviction that a higher form of non-human intelligence has visited this planet, that there are factions within our own government that know about this, yet we still don't have a plan, and they may represent a security issue. This may pose a threat to humans, yet you still believe that we should disclose. Is that right?
Correct, right. So there's really three reasons that trump all those others. And those others are basically valid, like I said. So the first issue is the moral right. The government exists for and by the people. And so the nature of reality is fundamentally not government information. People have a right to know the world in which we live, and the pursuit of happiness requires that knowledge. So that's sort of the first kind of overarching philosophical foundation for this. But, as a corollary to that, if there are misdeeds that were done, then they need to be remediated. If there's lack of proper oversight, which is suggested by some of the whistleblowers, that needs to be remediated. So the first issue is the moral issue. The second issue is being in a reactive mode is never preferable to being in a proactive mode. So reactive mode is basically trying to prevent disclosure. But failing that, you might get a situation where you have catastrophic disclosure that creates all the problems that you were trying to prevent. So a more balanced middle path of controlled disclosure is the best way to do this, which is, again, an argument for some amount of disclosure. And the third part is simply societal advance and global competitiveness. More brain trust needs to be brought into this topic in order to make progress and to improve society. And so all three of those things together trump the 6 other reasons for non-disclosure.
Yeah, so he was saying basically, so with non-disclosure, I don't know if he's gotten to this part yet or not, but basically, if you, like with a reactive state, if you keep trying to hide the truth, eventually it's going to blow up in your face, and the truth will come out anyways so chaotically that they'll reach a state what's called catastrophic disclosure. It'll happen in an unwanted and uncontrolled manner and can create chaos. Because like you said earlier, there's no plan. And for this sort of thing, they're working on it. He's part of it. And I've seen other videos about that, which is very fascinating. However, so these 3 points that support disclosure, sharing this information, outweigh any other reasons not to. And the first one being we have the moral right to understand where we come from and what's out there in order to live a life in pursuit of happiness. We need the full truth. We need to know what existence is and what our knowledge of it is. And so there's a moral obligation to release this information. And number 2, he was saying, what was he saying? What was the second one? I know the third one had to do with this type of thing. Okay, hold on. Let me backtrack. Number 2, sorry.
The second issue is being in a reactive mode.
Oh, yeah. So he's talking. Okay, so reactive is all being proactive about this sort of thing is better because then it can be controlled and it's information released and things mitigated or prepared for one step at a time rather than reacting and to problems as they happen. We're trying to hide the information until like the dam bursts. So proactive, not reactive.
So a more balanced middle path of controlled disclosure is the best way to do this, which is, again, an argument for some amount of disclosure. And the third part is simply societal advance and global competitiveness. More brain trust needs to be brought into this topic in order to make progress and to improve society. And so all 3 of those things together trump the 6 other reasons.
Yeah, of course. So if we don't unleash the world's talent with this particular new set of information, we will never maximize our ability to deal with it. because we're limiting the talent pool, basically, if I understand right what he's saying, by not allowing the world to know what's going on so we can work towards bettering Earth with this knowledge.
Reasons for non-disclosure.
And what do you think happens if we don't disclose? I know you mentioned this idea of catastrophic disclosure. Maybe disclosure may be forced upon us. How do you think about that?
So the situation is usually thought of as a binary state. It's like an all or nothing. And people have sort of argued this. But anybody paying attention realizes the government has already indicated that unidentified anomalous phenomena are real, they're not ours, and they're not our adversaries. The Pentagon has said that. Like, for people that are paying attention.
Yeah, they've come out and released information, declassified more files, as far as UAPs, as they call them now. And like you said, we've confirmed. It's hard to believe what they tell us, of course, because there has been non-disclosure up until this point. But he said, and this isn't the full truth either, just like with the whole SETI comment about, well, you were not transmitting signals. We've been transmitting signals and receiving signals for a long time. So there's still a certain degree of, semantics and lack of trust, which, of course, you're supposed to trust your government. But in this case, I get it for the reasons we've covered already. However, it still doesn't create a very good bridge of trust unless you really explain the reasons behind the sort of thing, which he does quite well here, but still. So I have a point of contention here because what he's talking about is...
Like, that show already dropped.
The UAPs, that's right. So, the Pentagon admitted, okay, here's UFOs. They're not ours. They're not our adversaries. So, in other words, we've admitted that there are UAPs or UFOs here, and it's not of earthly origin. We don't know. For example, initially they said we don't know what they are. Are they controlled? What do they come from? Are they natural occurring? They know. They've known forever. These are UFOs. But another kind of built-in lie here is not all UFO sightings come from other civilizations. Some are reverse-engineered craft that the government and other world governments have reverse-engineered or created and are test flights, and sometimes are seen. And, of course, we can't tell the difference, which one is which. But also they do these things. There's a dual purpose here. It's very complicated, and they're very particular about what they do. But sometimes these UFOs are seen on purpose to gauge the reaction of how people will react. They're testing to see, okay, let's fly one of our homemade UFOs over here and see how's it going to go down on social media? What's going to happen? So carefully testing the reaction to things. That way they can understand them when they happen with real UFOs. So I get the idea behind it, that it's good to test and know for these sorts of things. But this level, unless that is explained outright later on, it has to be explained at a certain point. Because when something's hidden and they don't explain a good reason to, and sometimes there may not be a good reason and they just need the data, and so they'll never tell us. But so anyways, he didn't really fully explain that. Stephen Greer, the guy I mentioned earlier, talks about that, and he says there's quite a few incidents where they pretend to be aliens or UFOs for a variety of reasons. But anyways.
So for a lot of people, they think that the second shoe to drop is this is non-human intelligence. And maybe the conversation stops there. Like the president comes out and says, there's non-human intelligence. The truth is that will precipitate this crescendo of other questions that maybe the government's not ready to answer, that will court, if not precipitate, potential negative ramification for society. And so as an example of this, I would actually point to something from the ancient past, the Bronze Age collapse. So Eric Klein, Princeton University, 2015, wrote a very interesting book called 1177 BC, the year that civilization failed. And so this is well known to current scholarship. Within a single lifetime, all of the very effective ancient civilizations of the Bronze Age failed due to a confluence of reasons that are not necessarily fully understood today. So we're talking about Egypt, the Hittite Empire, the Minoan Empire, the Mycenaean Empire, the Babylonian Empire. All these civilizations failed never to return, other than, let's say, Egypt. And so these were highly sophisticated civilizations with highly developed infrastructures, highly developed administrative states. They were globalist, in a sense, very similar to today in terms of the known world, the known Near East. They were economically interdependent. They had both diplomatic ties and commerce ties. And yet these civilizations failed in a single lifetime because of stressors that these civilizations collectively could not address within the time frame. And so if we look at our society today, one might argue that it's similarly fractured, similarly under economic stress, similarly under cultural stress as well, fractured and fragile diplomatic situation. It mirrors very much this scenario.
Yeah.
And so for a responsible decision maker, that is certainly a factor.
And so I guess when you say that, are you implying that perhaps we as a society may not be ready for disclosure? Or are you saying that we may not be able to defend ourselves against this other force?
So there's sort of different viewpoints on whether people are ready to deal with this phenomenon. And popular culture is kind of infused with this stuff. Roswell became a meme a long time ago. We got programs on ancient aliens, Skinwalker Ranch, all this stuff. I guess I would draw an analogy, though, for people that believe in a certain faith tradition, whatever that faith tradition is, and hold to that and subscribe to that in a very serious and devout way, and sort of pose the question, even for folks of that ilk, and I would count myself as one, if you're confronted with the reality of your religious belief system, like the reality of the metaphysical, an angel, a messenger from God, what have you, that's going to be a sea state change in your way of dealing with reality, right? Even though you already believe it, right? So it's one thing to believe and it's another to know. And I think in this context, this phenomena has the potential for an analogous effect both on the individual and on society.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point. Like, what is the impact this would have? For example, with your religious faith system, whatever that is, if, like I was saying earlier, if these truths start to come to light, there's civilizations that understand where souls go when we die and have the scientific evidence and proof to track to and communicate with those over there for this sort of information, and have achieved these high levels of technology. And humans have off-world ties to like, what is our history and where do we come from, and why are there elements of human-like civilizations literally on Mars, and genetic manipulation? What is the whole history here? And so if you could imagine if just the very question of what we are and where we go when we die changes. I mean, everything changes. I mean, religion is so built into our economies and our psychology, and even a lot of places across the world, their very governments and how they view and rule their people. Things would change, and of course there'd be confusion, like, is this true? And once we have the proof, these religions will either collapse or evolve, or even stay the same, even in the face of truth. Who knows? But as the truth is made known, this sort of information can be incorporated, and I think we could evolve consciously, mentally, and spiritually as the truth becomes known to us, because that's what all these religions are doing, are seeking the truth and philosophy and that sort of thing. So, and the answers are out there. And again, the government knows these things and these beings, these highly evolved beings that come from dozens of different types of races and all sorts of places. There's this big federation that the Israeli general talks about. It's like in Star Trek. And they're advanced and they have amazing technology. And they have this information, and so does the government now. And they're just trying to figure out how to release it to Earth without causing complete chaos. If you could imagine, that it just makes sense now. Considering the big picture, it would just change everything. So I always wondered too, like, why Donald Trump, considering, who he is, when he found out all this information, why didn't he just come out and say it? Because the Israeli general was like, yeah, Donald Trump was going to, he was like, I'm going to tell the public once he found out this information, but everybody was like, no, absolutely not. And this is why you don't want to be that guy, that ruined Earth or started upending religion and the very way that we coexist as we do on Earth now. So controlled disclosure, like this guy is saying, is the best strategy.
But do you think that the phenomena, this non-human form of intelligence, represents a threat to humanity?
So this is a good question too, and some of the other folks have sort of framed things in that light. And I guess I would suggest that if the universe is governed by conservation laws, and it's probably reasonable to assume the laws of nature that we understand apply everywhere. We may have incomplete understanding, undoubtedly we do, of these laws, but they're sort of homogeneous and they apply throughout the universe. And so those laws are governed by conservation rules. There's conserved quantities. And so this reality really forces a Darwinian type competition in order to survive. And so it's reasonable to assume any other civilization that's evolved has come up through the same Darwinian evolutionary process. So I think it's naive to expect complete altruism until and unless you get to a state of post-scarcity, where you essentially have no physical needs that we're kind of encumbered with in this universe. And so in some sense, it's the economics of the future that are going to determine whether there's cooperation, competition, or some kind of symbiosis, and inform the intention. But to assume either malintent or complete altruism, I think, is somewhat naive.
Yeah. So
I had to listen to this a couple of times to kind of figure it out, but it makes sense now that I understand what he's saying here. Because the guy who asked the question said, basically, are these beings, are these aliens, are they dangerous? Malintent is what the colonel responded with. Like, are they malevolent? Do they have a bad agenda? Well, he said it's not. Basically, what he was talking about are these laws of conservation. We know fundamentally how the rules of the universe and cosmos work. It's not complete quite yet, like he was saying, but there is a homogeneous set of basically fundamental laws that exist no matter where you go in the physical universe. And we're still trying to figure out how these laws work and everything. And what they say is there's a limited quantity of things. That's what he's talking about. This Darwinian model, for example, survival of the fittest, renewable versus non-renewable energy. So now, remember, space-time is infinite. The very concept of space and time is infinite. And it is teeming with energy. And that's what this energy, some may call this unbounded, infinite space that everything exists in every direction. God. Some may call it like the 0-point field of energy. It's real and it can be quantified and measured. And this is where 0-point energy comes in. And Nikola Tesla, for example, you could take like just a space of it, like amount of energy you could source from something like this big. If you can use that to heat up all the oceans on planet Earth and they would evaporate. You can create that much heat. And if that's just from that much, if you can imagine, and if space and time are infinite and there is energy within this space-time continuum, which there is, so the Big Bang Theory is just the idea that this energy, eventually compounded and interacted with each other until eventually it just exploded and things kind of settled into the physical Earth as we know it, the Big Bang Theory. Some people say this infinite energy field is God, and this has a form of consciousness, of course, that created the physical universe. So there's still that whole, argument. But it's real, this space-time infinite field of energy. So, and if you can tap into infinite energy, no more need for gasoline or oil or even electricity or hydro or solar power. You can literally take the very fabric of existence and turn it into energy and never run out of it. So, and that's what he's talking about here. So he's saying it's safe to say that all these civilizations go through the same process we did here on Earth. of understanding this type of thing. And even if they do reach a level of post-scarcity, meaning they no longer have to worry about things like non-renewable resources, theoretically possible, just like you mentioned at post-scarcity, many of these civilizations have reached that. Supplies to medical field, resources for housing, food, health, longevity, therefore longevity, space-time travel, AI communication with the afterlife, all of these different areas that they are fully aware of and understand are a possibility. So he said it's foolish to either assume that they've reached this level of post-scarcity and therefore are completely altruistic, are here to help and give us all this stuff. Not true, because just like with nuclear energy, it can be good or bad. A little bit of nuclear energy can power an entire country, or it can be used to create bombs that can destroy an entire country. So that's why this information must be used responsibly. So, like you said, it's a little bit naive to assume pure altruism in a state of post-scarcity, which many of these civilizations have achieved. The highest levels of them have. But it's also naive to assume malevolence or malintent. And I think I can understand that point because on one hand, they're not just going to give us all this information because we could prove to be irresponsible. We have to earn our way over time by showing we can use this information responsibly. So the other being, we can't assume malintent either because they've been here and they have bases in mountains and under the ocean and in the earth and in the moon. And they've been here just monitoring and observing forever, but not directly interfering to one degree or another. But just like the analogy of, say, we're aware of a tribe in the South Pacific or South America, and they're living very basic lifestyles. We know they're there, but we let them do their own thing. We don't really interfere, but we communicate from time to time. Well, once they say they're like, okay, we reach a certain level of communication and knowledge, and they want to advance their consciousness and say, okay, we want more knowledge, we want more resources, we want this and this, and they start to interact with us more, and we'll say, okay, so if that's your choice, here is some technology and here's some resources. But we're not just going to go to a tribe who's still living in the jungle and saying, oh, hey, here's an atomic bomb. And by the way, here's the cure for cancer. And here's a car. Here's a set of keys to a brand new car, like you're on a game show. Here's a brand new car, and like $1 million. What are they going to do with all this if we just give it to all of them? So intellectually, spiritually, on a conscious level and a level of practicality, we do represent those people. We are that tribe, that basic tribe. So
it sounds like what you're saying is it's impossible to know the true intentions of a higher intelligence. We may be competing for the same scarce resources. We may not be, right? We may be almost irrelevant to them, and they may be acting altruistically, although we cannot safely assume that. And so I guess I'm curious, if we continue down this disclosure path, do you believe that disclosure is inevitable?
So, again, people that sort of look at this topic and study it, and there have been some good examinations on this from a historical standpoint, have realized that, we're not in really a new state. This sort of disclosure emphasis has come and gone over time. And so this is not the first time we've arrived at this stage. I would suggest that maybe the peak of this current cycle happened last December with the Schumer Amendment, and then it got rolled back, it was defeated in the House. And so it remains to be seen, if the process is going to continue. One hopes and can maybe draw a little bit of confidence that maybe this will come around is the colloquy that Senator Schumer and Senator Rounds had back in December. After their amendment got killed, they basically went on the Senate floor and articulated their rationale for the legislation. And I think Senator Schumer, to quote him, almost said it was a travesty that this did not pass. So this is, a bipartisan colloquy on a topic that I guess most people would probably consider fringe, and yet these two senators felt the need to do that and to double down on their desire to see this through.
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll see maybe a reintroduction of some version of that this summer, with the goal of maybe putting it into the NDAA by the end of the year.
Do you think that it's imperative that the United States leads on the disclosure efforts?
So this is an interesting question too, because this is a global phenomenon and it's affecting other countries just like the United States. The reporting on this is clear over decades. Other countries have reported this stuff. And not only that, the Vatican has come out and made statements that reference or tangentially reference this topic. So organized religion has a say in this topic as well. So it's really a whole of planet, whole of humanity problem. And so the U.S. has got its role to play, but these other countries have their role to play, and it would behoove us to recognize that U.S. action could be preempted by another party, and it would be probably more conducive to work collectively.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that I don't fully understand that I'd love to get your thoughts on, Carl, I mean, if we assume that a higher form of non-human intelligence has been visiting this planet, if we assume that some of the statements made by folks like Dave Grush are true, that we have crash materials, and if we assume that those craft that we may have exhibit characteristics that defy our current understanding of physics, it would seem that that technology would provide an incredible strategic advantage to whatever nation ends up reverse engineering it first. And so, to me, that would imply that there is a race happening to reverse engineer this, and that this topic would be a top priority. Do you agree with that?
So I think some of what you say is a reasonable conclusion to be drawn, and I've suggested something similar in past statements. The point here, though, is to go from a pre-disclosure to a post-disclosure world, maybe two stable states that are separated by an unstable middle ground. And so how you make that transition, again, bespeaks to the concern about this catastrophic disclosure. And this has come up in sort of arms regulation too. Mutually assured destruction, however much we don't like it, is sort of a stable kind of geostrategic regime. The Reagan era defense shield idea is also a very stable scenario, but to go from one to the other is very unstable. Yeah. And so this topic sort of mirrors that.
Yeah, and I know you and I were talking earlier about this idea that in order to really understand the phenomena, it's likely that we have to further our understanding of.
That's an interesting thought there too, the idea of mutual destruction. So that's the post. He was talking about the Reagan era, with the Cold War in the Soviet Union, but in the post-disclosure model, once they disclose. Never all, but a lot of or most of the information of what the government knows, then it's kind of a stable model. And it sounds a bit backwards. It's kind of ironic that once like two competing superpowers on any planet develop the ability to destroy each other and the rest of the planet completely, they reach a stalemate. And they're like, okay, we're not going to go to war. We're not going to try to conquer the planet. Say the bad guys, and okay, we're not going to try to conquer the planet for the good, say the good guys. So we'll just kind of exist knowing we both have the potential to destroy each other with nuclear weapons and the entire planet along with it. So another reason why we have to stay ahead of the game, because if you think about it, if we're so far behind the eight balls to where the enemies have all the military and all the economic power and all the technological advancements, and then therefore just take over the world. And we're in a position where we can't not even match them, but preemptively be able to beat them to this technology. In other words, if they're able to master it and then conquer the world and we don't even have a chance to catch up, then the end game is over. So, and the United States, we are so far ahead. China's pretty advanced, but like as far as money, and they just sent a probe to the dark side of the moon, actually. Funny enough. So all these governments are out there doing this sort of thing. But if you can imagine, even if they get to a point collectively, Russia, China, Syria, North Korea, all these places, Iran, like all their allies they work with, for example, to where they're like, oh, we have the ability and the power, destructive power and military power to a certain degree, but the U.S. is already there, then that keeps them in check. So we have to beat them to it, or be at a point to where we can immediately meet them step by step. But I think we're pretty far ahead collectively at a very general level, at a good versus bad sort of ideological. It's a very nuanced argument, of course, but, at a very high level. So mutual destruction is a stable model, is what he was saying, as funny as it sounds, like we once had before. But that would be the point we get after post-disclosure, and we work together to even, work together as humans and go out in outer space and figure out what's going on out there, knowing that we still have our differences at home, but we need to work as a planet and use all our resources to benefit us all, even though, we're still kind of watching each other out of the side of our eyes. So
reality itself. And I guess I'm wondering, I can imagine a future where we acknowledge and we know that there is a higher form of non-human intelligence, yet we still don't truly understand the phenomena. We still don't truly understand reality. And so I guess I'm wondering, do you think that we'll ever truly understand what's going on? Or if part of the game, part of the journey, part of life itself is operating in an environment where at least part of it is fundamentally unknowable to us?
So it's a totally philosophical, epistemological question, right? Really about the nature of knowledge itself, right? Like, how can we know what we know, and how can we be sure about what we know? I guess personally, I subscribe to the idea that there is an ultimate truth, and that humanity, being created in the image of a higher power, is endowed with the quality to pursue an understanding of that. And so our part of our objective in this existence is to seek that out and try to understand that ultimate truth to a greater and greater degree. And this would be a component of that, obviously.
Yeah. Well, Carl, I really appreciate
the look on his face every time he looks at the presenter, it always cracks me up. Like, just watch.
That ultimate truth to a greater and greater degree. And this would be a component of that, obviously.
Yeah. Right there. That same, he always has that. You can tell he's in the military. He's got a very serious, unblinking, intense stare every time he answers the question, and then looks at the interviewer for the next question. It's funny. It's a very matter-of-fact body language. But, yeah, so that's an interesting thought. So this last question the interviewer is asking is, do you believe that it's just the nature of reality that no matter what, we will live amongst the unknown? And that is an interesting question. So he said it's an epistemological question, which is the study of knowledge itself and the application of knowledge. So, and I agree with this guy when he said, I believe in an ultimate truth. Absolutely. So I think things can be conceptualized at a very basic, fundamental level, and everything can be understood as a simple duality, and of course the spectrum sometimes within that duality. But conceptually speaking, we can understand the very basic and axioms and axiomatic concepts of existence itself, using truth as a baseline. And there is an ultimate truth to all of this. And I think that we will get there. And basically, the truth is eternally unfolding. So there's always going to be something we don't know, in other words. But once we kind of realize the basics, we can extrapolate everything from there. And the potential is endless and just amazing to think about sometimes. I think about it sometimes. But I believe there is an ultimate truth. And that's what we're constantly seeking, really, if you think about it, is like he was saying, what is known, what is unknown? Well, I subscribe to an ultimate truth. I think the ultimate truth is simply the idea of truth, me personally, because something's either true or false, and that is the most simple way to understand something and begin to evolve your knowledge from that. And of course, there's an ultimate truth. There's a truth that permeates in everything, and we just need to understand it and continuously seek it until we get to a certain level of truthful understanding about all there is. And on that note, that is the end. I think there's a little bit more.
Well, Carl, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today. I'm hopeful and optimistic that together maybe we can move the ball forward here and further our understanding of what is really going on, because I certainly agree with you. I think it is very consequential that we figure this out. So thank you again for coming. Thank you again to SALT for hosting us, and thank you all for listening. Bye.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, well, there's the video.
All right, so there's the video, and I'm going to do my best to kind of summarize it, both at a very basic level, not only what he was talking about, but also just at a fundamental level, but also holistically, and the implications of exactly what he was discussing here. And starting with disclosure, for example. Now, well, let's take a step back from that, actually. Just the very idea of existence and where this all comes from is just what defines us as humans, right? So where do we come from? Where do we go when we die? Is there a way to figure this out? Yes, there is. Are aliens real? Are we all that's out there? What's all this UFO activity? Now, like he was saying, it is just, statistically, it's just impossible to imagine that we're the only forms of life out there. Not only are we not the only planet with life, we are really at the bottom end of the totem pole. We've only had writing for 5,000 years roughly, and major organized religions go back 1,000 or 2,000 years. There's some pre-existing religions that kind of led into the major ones as we know them, I think over the last 3,000 to 5,000 years, of course, and a little bit before that. But writing systems basically go back, I think, like 5,000 years, and we didn't start really our more complex societies as hunter and gatherers and social units across the planet until maybe 10 or 12,000 years ago. This isn't very long when you think about it. 10,000 years if we go back, considering there's hundreds of thousands of years just with Homo sapiens alone, and then millions of years, and the planet is 500 million years old. 5 to 10,000 years is not a very long time, but we're accelerating very fast. So now everything that we know, and a lot of it's off base, our human origins, for example. Just to kind of summarize, conceptually, it's possible to realize and understand and harness the very fabric of reality, the existence of all there is, and theoretically to study and understand it. So to know where we come from, and there's our human, hidden history on Mars, and who knows what went on there. And now there's aliens. This upends our very world order as far as organized religion and how we divide ourselves and try to survive here on the planet. So now, kind of getting to the video, the world governments, not just the United States, a lot of them, and a lot of world leaders for a long time, aliens have been here communicating with us for hundreds, thousands of years. They've been here since the planet. Its inception, actually. So these ideas that are coming out now to avoid catastrophic disclosure and controlled disclosure is currently occurring. And I think this is really exciting personally, because I am of the age to when I was a kid, we didn't have cell phones 30 to 40 years ago. There was no YouTube, this was well after the Roswell incident, but even back then, the government was like, no, it's not UFOs, it's weather balloons, there's no aliens, what are you talking about? And turns out it was, and they've been talking to them for at least close to the last 100 years or so. Goes back far before that, of course, but our knowledge has grown exponentially in our direct contact with them over the past 100 years, at least. So now they're understanding these things more, and these beings have been here on Earth, within the Earth, under the water. They have bases everywhere on the moon. And we are part of this next evolution in human consciousness, to where we theoretically understand the possibility of infinite energy and things like travel, new models of physics that allow for instantaneous travel at extremely impossibly long distances that we can't traverse now with our own current provable, more limited model of physics. So the idea that basically longevity, health, medicine, post-scarcity, realizing a state where we have enough materials or we could source energy to where everyone has everything they need on Earth. If you can imagine, this would eliminate all our differences religiously, culturally, historically. We'll still have them to a certain degree, but this would really take the burden off. And especially, not only that, but once we understand our origin as humans and where we come from, and the ability to use telepathy and contact the afterlife and study and observe where the souls go when they die and communicate with those in the afterlife using technology, this is a possibility. CIA has admitted to remote viewing. There is just, the implications here are enormous. It is the ultimate level of truthful understanding of the dynamics, the very existential concepts of all there is. And we're reaching that. But as you can imagine, again, it would be a massive shift in economics and military and power and control. And there have been other civilizations that have reached certain levels of technology that, kind of like we did, like with the atomic bomb, nuclear energy can destroy or help. Well, we unfortunately used it destructively, and this next level, infinitely sourced zero-point energy, can be used to feed and clothe and give energy freely to everybody on Earth forever. Or can be used to incinerate the planet and destroy it completely. So it's up to us where we go with this, unfortunately. And there have been other civilizations, from what I understand, that have reached these thresholds. And some are still out there. Not all aliens are good, and luckily the ones that are around us are. And they're kind of observing us, like the analogy I gave earlier. But there are those out there who realize this and try to use ultimate knowledge for negative purposes for whatever reason. So I hope we're on the right path, and I hope we get there as humans. But like the Colonel was saying, there is a model of pre-disclosure and post-disclosure, and they're both relatively stable. But just how do we get there without creating too much chaos? And once we get to that level of post-disclosure, how do we maintain that? And how do we begin to interact with these beings out there that have reached amazing and ancient levels of knowledge and life and technology that we can begin to work with and understand and continue to evolve mentally and spiritually as humans. The overall holistic picture and implications are just unbelievable if you stop to think about them. And I encourage you to watch that video again. It's just amazing. These are just concepts that will change everything we know. And we're getting there, which is cool. We're going to see that in our lifetime. And I think I barely touched on this earlier, but what I think is funny is, because when I was a kid, again, there was no cell phones. And I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself. I'm really tired. It's been an hour, and it's actually really late here. But on a final note, we are part of that threshold, that transition point. Just like, kids now are growing up with iPhones and YouTube and smartphones and instantaneous technology and Instagram and cars and electric cars and spaceships. All these things were just like ideas when I was a little kid, and that wasn't that long ago. So it's like, yeah, it makes me feel so old too. But if you can imagine in 100 to 200 years, our great-great-great-great-great-grandkids, it's going to be as commonplace to them as kids growing up now as it was for me not having these things. But it's a massive shift we're going through. So they'll, our kids, our great-great-great-grandkids in the future, they'll grow up and they'll be like Instagramming or YouTubing with like aliens on another planet, and they'll be, oh yeah, we're going to Mars for our honeymoon because we can travel there now, and like this next level of possibility is going to be commonplace. And we're in that time right now to where that shift is occurring. So it's an amazing, because if you imagine thousands of years we just lived without this knowledge and proof. Again, they've been here and people have contacted them, and governments even, or even like normal people like you and me could communicate with them telepathically And I did a video on that. It's really cool, actually. But as a whole, as a planet, this is new grounds, and I hope we take it in the right direction. So, anyways, thanks for watching again. It's amazing stuff. Let me know if you have any ideas or thoughts or comments, and experiences, ideas. Much appreciated. Thank you again, and we'll see you in the next video.